That morning in Portland carried a soft gray hue, the clouds drifting low like a thin veil draped over each street. Ethan Roberts walked slowly along the brick-paved sidewalk, the scuff of his worn shoes against the ground just loud enough for him to feel each step. Over his shoulders, a thick coat, faded with age, bore a few loose threads at the cuffs and frayed edges at the hem, part of the look he wanted people to see. A knit cap was pulled low over his face so that to anyone passing by, he was simply a tired-looking middle-aged man, unremarkable in the stream of mourning pedestrians. Ethan had prepared for this return not to be welcomed, but to observe, to listen, and to absorb. The Harbor Brew branch in the Riverdale district came into view, its gleaming glass front reflecting the cold winter light. This had once been a meeting place for familiar faces, the bus driver grabbing a quick cup before his route, students gathering over assignments, sometimes strangers drawn in just to feel the warmth radiating from the bar and the smiles behind the counter. But for months now, internal reports had claimed steady sales, consistent customer flow, and that everything was fine. It was a sharp contrast to the fragmented messages Ethan had heard from a few former employees. Whispers that the place had changed, that it no longer carried the soul he had once poured into it. He pushed the door open. A small wind chime above it gave a faint, weightless ring, yet no one looked up. The counter was spotless in a way that felt sterile, the neatly arranged tables devoid of the traces left behind by spontaneous conversations. Brian Cooper, the manager Ethan had never met in person, stood behind the counter adjusting the cuff of his crisp white shirt. His gaze swept briefly over the new arrival before lingering a fraction longer on Ethan's worn clothes. His voice was flat and cool. "I'm sorry, we have strict hygiene standards here. I think you should try somewhere else." The words came out short and tidy, as if rehearsed many times without a flicker of hesitation or doubt. Ethan smiled faintly, as though oblivious to the implication in the refusal, and reached into his pocket to pull out a crumpled $5 bill. "I just want a regular black coffee. Will this cover it?" he asked, his tone low and polite. Brian glanced at the bill without really looking, tilting his head toward the door. "There's a convenience store at the end of the block. They'll serve you." Ethan folded the bill back into his pocket, turned and walked out, each step slowing, as if to fully hear the sound of indifference. The door closed softly behind him, leaving an emptiness that felt colder than the wind outside. No one inside the cafe knew that the man they had just turned away was the one who had laid its very first brick. He walked a short distance, found a wooden bench across the street, and sat down, resting his hands on his knees, eyes fixed on the glass front, a place that once held both his faith and his memories. Quietly, childhood images came rushing back. A 10-year-old boy in a coastal Maine town, hurrying through narrow alleys with a bundle of newspapers tucked in a cloth bag, braving drizzle and icy wind. Every dime earned from the route was split in two, part for an egg sandwich at lunch, the rest hidden in a tin box under his bed so his little sister could have new shoes each winter. His thin, hard-working mother, who spent her days at a sewing factory, would still have the patience at night to sit beside him, mending shirts as she said, "You don't need much to have worth. You just need to know what you're willing to give." It was those words, carried through the years, that had led him to the idea of opening a coffee shop. Not to sell overpriced drinks or flaunt the refinement of imported beans, but to create a place where anyone could sit down, warm their hands around a cup, and know they were welcome. The first time he hung the wooden sign behind the counter with the words, "A cup for every hand," Ethan believed it would always be there, a reminder that value was never measured by a wallet. But now, sitting across from the Riverdale branch, he wondered if that sign still existed, or if it had been taken down like the very pieces of memory now slowly being eroded by time and by people's indifference. Sitting on the wooden bench across the street, Ethan didn't rush to leave. He watched every movement inside through the reflective glass. A group of 3 walked in 2 well-dressed women and a man wearing a tie. Brian immediately stepped out from behind the counter, his face lighting up as if greeting VIP guests. He shook their hands, guided them to a corner table, pulled out chairs, and personally took their order. The shift in his manner was so quick it felt to Ethan like watching a stage play where every role was cast according to clothing and appearance, not by the simple fact of being a customer. Meanwhile, at the far end of the counter, a petite young woman with her hair neatly tied back handed a small paper bag to a man wearing a worn canvas coat with frayed shoulders. The man opened the bag to find a muffin inside. He smiled, gratitude bright in his eyes, but before he could thank her, Brian appeared from behind. His voice was sharp and cold, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Lily, how many times have I told you? No giving away free items. This is a business, not a charity." The young woman lowered her head, murmuring, "I just," but was immediately cut off. "No excuses. Oh, if it happens again, you know the consequences." The air thickened for a few seconds, then everyone went back to work as if nothing had happened. But to Ethan, the moment felt like a slow knife cutting into the good memories he had once nurtured. He leaned forward slightly, fingers interlaced, his gaze fixed on Lily. From the way she had placed that paper bag into the man's hands, Ethan could see genuine warmth, the very thing he had once wanted to spread through every branch. In a space that had lost the breath of kindness, there was still someone holding on to it. But that also meant she would be a thorn in the side of someone like Brian. Ethan decided to return the next day. This time, he wouldn't just sit and watch. He entered like any other customer, ordered a small black coffee, paid in cash, and quietly chose a seat in a shadowed corner where he could see both the bar and the front door. For the next 2 hours, he took notes in a small notebook hidden beneath the table. Who was served immediately, who was made to wait, which customers received smiles, and which got frowns. A pattern began to emerge. Customers dressed plainly or seeming in a hurry were often ignored, sometimes even encouraged to take it to go instead of staying. Meanwhile, those with the right look were warmly greeted, told about new menu items, and always served at their table. Over the next 3 days, Ethan repeated the process, ordering the same drink, keeping the same appearance and name to see if anyone would recognize him. No one did. The indifference was near absolute, as if he were nothing more than a shadow passing through. Then, on the 4th day, as he was jotting notes, he noticed Brian holding a black notebook with worn corners. When Brian set it on the counter and stepped outside to take a call, Ethan glanced over and saw inside a list of names, each accompanied by brief notes. Too loud, unpleasant smell, cheap clothes, sits too long without ordering more. Next to each name was a red line and instructions like, "Do not serve," "Limit to 15 minutes," or "Suggest takeout." The neat handwriting was the coldest declaration yet that this was no longer the harbor brew he had built. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, letting the weight in his chest settle. He knew he had reached the deepest layer of the problem. This was not a handful of impulsive acts, but a system deliberately designed to filter people out. And to change it, he couldn't just walk in as the founder. He would have to bring it all into the light, leaving no one the chance to deny it. On Saturday morning, Riverdale was, as usual, veiled in a soft mist, the street in front of Harbor Brew dotted with a few scarf-wrapped figures hurrying along. Ethan had been there since early, sitting on the same familiar wooden bench, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee bought from another shop. He wanted to watch his cafe at what should be the warmest and busiest time of the week. But what met his eyes was only a scattering of customers, most coming and going quickly, not lingering to talk. The wooden sign with the words, "A cup for every hand," once the heart of the brand, was gone. On the wall behind the counter now hung a framed display of elaborately decorated latte art, paired with a new slogan, "Experience Premium Coffee Culture." The old spirit had been replaced by the language of selection and exclusion. Ethan leaned back, letting old memories flood in. He remembered the first days of opening the cafe, when the tables and chairs didn't match, the cups and saucers were worn finds from thrift markets, yet customers came not for perfection but for the feeling of looking each other in the eye and speaking without fear of judgment. The sweaty truck driver was always poured a second cup without being asked to pay. The student at the end of the month, with just enough for a cookie, could still sit all afternoon to work on assignments. Those were the days Harbor Brew didn't just sell coffee, It sold peace of mind. Now he saw Lily, still petite, her eyes carrying more caution than before. She calmly wiped the counter and arranged pastries, but the smile that had once been constant was no longer there. When a man came in, wearing a worn coat, hair damp from the rain, she quietly poured him a cup of water and placed a small wrapped pastry beside it. The gesture took only seconds, but Brian had seen it. He waited until the customer left before walking over, his voice dropping into an even, rehearsed tone, like delivering a pre-written sentence. "I warned you. This is the second time. Next time, you won't need to come back here." Lily only nodded slightly, eyes cast down, her hand gripping the dish towel tightly. She didn't react, didn't defend herself. In that room, every other gaze turned away, as if afraid that even a glance of sympathy would be enough to land them on the blacklist. Ethan felt as though he was watching a play on repeat, each act stripping away another piece of the cafe's soul. He also realized that to save this place, a simple reminder or reprimand would never be enough. What was eating away at Harbor Brew was something deeper, a corrupted culture where value was measured by the size of the bill and the clothes on the customer. It hadn't appeared on its own. Someone had cultivated it. And here, that person was Brian. That evening in his rented apartment on the outskirts, Ethan opened his old laptop and logged into the management system where he still retained founder-level access. Revenue reports, payrolls, promotion schedules, all had been adjusted. There were no longer any notes about student discounts or early morning deals for laborers. Shady expenses appeared under manager bonuses, and sales figures didn't match the POS data. Silently, he downloaded each file, time-stamped them, and stored them in a separate folder. The more he looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't negligence. This was a deliberate restructuring, designed to turn the cafe into a place that served only the right kind of customer while maximizing personal profit for a select few. Ethan closed the laptop, leaned back in his chair, and took a deep breath. He understood that once he moved to confront this, everything would change, not only for Brian, but for the employees who had stayed silent out of fear. But if he did nothing, Harbor Brew would lose the last remnants of its soul, and Lily, the only one brave enough to keep a little warmth alive, would be erased from the picture. He hadn't come here to watch that happen. Sunday morning in Portland was quieter than usual. The streets of Riverdale draped in a thin white mist like a veil hiding every movement. Ethan had made his decision. If he wanted to reclaim Harbor Brew, he had to bring the truth into the light, not let it keep hiding in the shadows of cleverly altered reports. He knew that walking in openly as the founder would only make Brian suspicious, closing ranks and covering his tracks. The only way was to make Brian confident enough to reveal everything himself, in front of the very people he still believed to be silent witnesses. The night before, Ethan opened his laptop and logged into the management system using an old secondary account, a pseudonym he had created when first expanding the brand. From there, he sent an email to all employees at the Riverdale branch announcing an urgent meeting with a potential investor to take place Monday morning. Every word was chosen with care, formal enough with a hint of pressure about the need to make an impression and suggesting an opportunity to expand the premium coffee culture model, a phrase Ethan knew would instantly catch Brian's attention. Just the mention of an investor would guarantee Brian put on his best performance, and in that moment, the evidence Ethan had gathered would become a blade he couldn't avoid. The next morning, Ethan arrived early, still dressed as the unremarkable customer no one bothered to remember. Sitting at a table in a quiet corner, he watched every detail. Brian in a crisp new checked shirt, wine-colored tie, standing in front of his laptop rehearsing lines full of vision, as if preparing for the most important pitch of his career. The staff clustered in small groups, quieter than usual. Lily stood toward the back, hands holding a tray of clean glasses, her eyes shifting repeatedly to the entrance as if expecting something out of the ordinary. Ethan saw in her a different kind of vigilance, not just toward customers, but toward the unusual tension hanging over the room. At exactly 10:30, the door opened, and instead of an unfamiliar investor, Ethan stepped inside, moving slowly, his eyes unflinching. The entire room seemed to pause for a beat. Brian frowned, then quickly recovered his familiar cold expression, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I'm sorry, this is a private meeting. You must be in the wrong place." A few employees turned slightly, unsure whether to be surprised or cautious. Ethan took a few more steps forward, placing a thick envelope on the table near the projector, his voice low and steady. "No, I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." His eyes swept the room, stopping briefly on each face, from those he had never met to longtime employees who had changed in small but telling ways. Then he removed his knit cap, revealing the silver at his temples and the face that had once appeared in so many opening day photographs. "I'm Ethan Roberts, founder of Harbor Brew." The silence thickened. Brian froze for half a second, then let out a short, dry laugh, though the corner of his mouth twitched. Ethan didn't give him time to regain control. "Before we talk about the future of this place, everyone needs to know what's been happening here." He opened his laptop and connected it to the projector. The screen lit up on the wall, not with Brian's polished slides, but with the documents, audio clips, and photographs Ethan had quietly gathered. For each piece of evidence, he gave a brief explanation, never raising his voice, because the weight lay in the truth itself, not in its volume. Altered figures, discriminatory customer directives, unauthorized bonuses, all of it displayed plainly before their eyes. Brian stood motionless, the color draining from his face. Ethan didn't end it right away. He let the silence stretch, giving everyone in the room time to absorb what they'd just seen. It was in that moment he realized the real change wouldn't come from him single-handedly taking Brian down, but from the entire room looking directly at the problem and understanding they, too, had a choice: to keep their silence, or to stand with him in bringing Harbor Brew back to its true course. In the small meeting room, the air seemed to grow heavier with each page of documents turned. The numbers on the screen were no longer dry data, but undeniable accusations. Brian took a deep breath, trying to remain composed, then began to speak, his tone carrying a hint of pleading. "You don't understand, Ethan. We have to survive in a brutally competitive environment. The decisions I've made were to protect the brand, to maintain profit." He paused, glancing around in search of agreement, but was met only with averted or cold stares. Ethan didn't interrupt, letting him finish before responding in a calm, yet unwavering voice. "Protect the brand? By shutting out the very people who need us most? By turning Harbor Brew into a place only for a select group of customers you've decided are the right kind? You haven't just changed how this store operates, Brian. You've changed its soul, and you've used it for your own personal gain." The last words weren't delivered for dramatic effect, but like a blade, precise and deliberate, cutting through every layer of excuse. In the silence that followed, Ethan turned his eyes to the back of the room, where Lily stood still, the tray in her hands trembling slightly. He stepped toward her, stopping just close enough for everyone to see. "There is someone here who has never forgotten why Harbor Brew exists. She hasn't altered numbers. She hasn't turned customers away because they didn't fit some brand image. And she's shown up every day, working diligently, even when exhausted, even when disrespected. And she has still chosen kindness, knowing it could cost her job." Lily's eyes widened, her lips parted, but no words came. Ethan gave a faint, assured smile. "Lily Harper will be the new manager of this branch." The room held its breath for a beat. Then a single clap came from the far left corner. Hesitant at first, then stronger as others joined in. Smiles began to reappear on faces where they hadn't been seen in a long time. Tyler, the young employee, raised his hand like someone who had just witnessed a winning goal. Brian remained still, his shoulders sagging, unable to find a single supportive gaze. At that moment, a knock sounded at the door and 2 police officers stepped inside, their expressions firm. One asked, "Brian Cooper?" When he answered, the officer continued, "You're under arrest for financial fraud, falsifying accounting records, and attempting to illegally sell brand assets. It's all been documented." The sound of handcuffs snapped through the quiet room, and not a single voice rose in his defense. As Brian was led away, he glanced back, but all eyes had shifted to Lily, now standing in the central position he had once occupied. Ethan turned to the staff, his voice slow but weighted with purpose. "From today forward, this place will return to what it was meant to be, a place for everyone. But that can only happen if each of you stands together in keeping that promise." He didn't need to say more, because in their eyes he could already see agreement, not born from fear, but from the return of something far stronger: belief. A week later, Riverdale woke to a rare, clear morning after days of rain. Sunlight filtered gently through the tree canopy, casting a soft, golden hue across the front of Harbor Brew. The wooden sign reading, "A cup for every hand," was back in its place, cleaned and freshly oiled. The small scratches remained, proof that while memories may fade over time, true values never disappear. Inside, the cafe was no more glamorous than before, yet it brimmed with the sound of voices, laughter, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. A student sat by the window, typing on a laptop while sipping a latte. Across from him, a construction worker in a reflective vest ate a sandwich while scrolling through his phone. There were no reserved signs, no priority customer section, only open tables waiting for someone to sit down. Lily moved from table to table, carrying no notepad or headset, simply listening and smiling, occasionally leaning in to ask a short question to make sure guests felt comfortable. On the counter sat a small wooden box next to a handwritten sign that read, "Pay it forward coffee, buy one, give one." There were no flashy posters, but a printed sheet beside it showed that in just 2 weeks, the cafe had given away over 300 cups of coffee to those in need. Each time a gifted cup was handed over, the staff said only one thing: "Someone left this here for you." No names asked, no reasons given. That afternoon, the door opened and a man stepped inside. Thin frame, faded coat, eyes slightly downcast. In his hands, he held a knit cap worn thin at the edges. Ethan recognized him instantly. Victor Lane, a customer who had once loudly criticized the cafe back when the policy of removing unsuitable customers was in place. Now, he stood hesitantly at the counter, speaking softly. "Just a small, black coffee." Lily looked at him, her eyes holding neither triumph nor reproach, only a calm expression as if there were no distance left between them. She poured the coffee, set it gently on the counter, and added a paper-wrapped cinnamon roll. "No charge," she said slowly. "Here, everyone deserves a chance to start again." Victor hesitated for a moment, then gave a small nod, wrapping both hands around the coffee as if holding on to something precious. From the back table, Ethan watched without stepping in, without intruding on that moment. He knew justice was not only about punishing the wrongdoer, but sometimes about opening a door for someone who had lost their way. And today, that door had been opened. He looked around and saw a group of staff chatting, their laughter quiet but genuine. Faces that once looked down now lifted, no longer scanning to see if the manager was watching. The cafe no longer felt heavy. It was breathing, alive again. The wooden door swung open and shut as customers came and went. The warmth of coffee mingled with sunlight, blending with the soft background music and the sound of spoons clinking against cups. A middle-aged man held the door for a young woman. An elderly lady shared a table with a college student. All of it stood as proof that when trust is restored, the space itself transforms. Ethan smiled faintly, took the last sip of his coffee, and thought to himself, Harbor Brew had come home. Late in the afternoon, the last light of day filtered through the cafe's windows, stretching long, delicate ribbons of gold across the tables. The shop was still busy, but not noisy. Conversations blended with the gentle hum of the espresso machine and the soft clinking of spoons against cups. Ethan sat at a table against the wall from where he could take in the whole room without drawing attention. In his eyes, Harbor Brew was no longer just a functioning business. It was like a body that had survived a serious illness, now slowly regaining its strength, each breath steady, each cell beginning to warm again. Lily was speaking with a college student who had just paid. She glanced down at the student ID he'd handed her for a discount, then smiled gently. "Good luck on your exam next week," she said. The young man nodded, thanked her, and walked out. It was only a small gesture, but Ethan knew that was exactly what Harbor Brew had once given to thousands of people. The feeling of being seen, being acknowledged, even when you had nothing that made you stand out. He remembered the first day he hung the wooden sign in the original shop more than 20 years ago. His hands had trembled with nerves, the painted letters still smudged in places, but the meaning had been clear from the start. A cup for every hand. It wasn't just about coffee. It was a promise that anyone who stepped through the door deserved a seat and a moment of peace. During the busy years of expanding the brand, Ethan had believed that promise was strong enough to sustain itself, that as long as the sign stayed up, the value would remain. But reality proved otherwise. Values left unprotected erode, not from sudden storms, but from the slow drip of tiny compromises made day after day. To preserve them, you needed people like Lily, those willing to choose kindness, even knowing it might cost them. Victor Lane still sat by the window, hands wrapped around a black coffee that had cooled, eyes on the street but seemingly lost in his own thoughts. For a brief moment, Ethan caught his gaze. There was no trace of bitterness now, only weariness mixed with gratitude. Victor's small nod told Ethan that sometimes redemption doesn't need long speeches. It begins with accepting forgiveness. Outside, a boy of about 10 ran past the door, a coin rolling in his hand. His laughter drifted into the shop, mingling with the sounds of life carrying on. Ethan took his final sip of coffee, the warmth spreading from his throat into his chest. He didn't need to record this moment, didn't need to take a photo, because it was already etched deep in his memory, a reminder that justice, in its purest form, is not the sound of a gavel in a courtroom, but the ability for a space, a community, to find its breath again. As he rose to leave, Ethan didn't speak to anyone, simply leaving a folded piece of paper on Lily's table, a few simple words: "Keep this warmth. Don't let anyone take it away again." That evening, a light rain returned to Portland, fine droplets clinging to the cafe windows like tiny beads of light reflecting the glow of the street lamps. Inside Harbor Brew, customers lingered, talking beneath the warm golden light. From across the street, Ethan stood with his hands deep in the pockets of his coat, looking through the glass and realizing he no longer needed to step inside to be certain that this place had found itself again. He knew there would still be hard days ahead, moments when profits would be tested by the decision to keep programs that seemed to bring in no return. But now, with Lily and the people willing to defend these values, the cafe would stand firm. More than that, it would remain a haven for anyone who had ever believed they weren't welcome anywhere. Laughter spilled out from inside, blending with the scent of coffee and the sound of rain, creating a familiar harmony Ethan had missed for far too long. He turned away, walking slowly down the wet street, letting the cold wind brush his shoulders. Inside, he didn't feel empty. He felt light, as if an old promise had just been placed back into the right hands. The story of Harbor Brew wouldn't make the front page of a business journal, nor be dissected in management seminars, but it would live on in the memory of every customer who had been handed a cup of coffee from willing hands. And perhaps more importantly, it would continue to live in the hearts of those who believe that kindness needs no reason. If you have ever been turned away, ever been made to feel small, remember that somewhere a door is still open for you. Sometimes it's just a hot cup of coffee and a quiet seat. Sometimes it's someone who believes you deserve a second chance. And who knows, maybe you will be the one to open that door for the next person. Because anywhere, whether it's a small street corner or the heart of a bustling city, a single cup of coffee can be a reminder. We all belong here. Looking back at the entire story, it's clear that what keeps a brand alive isn't just its business model or marketing strategy, but the core values that are protected through every small action. A coffee shop can change its sign, update its menu, upgrade its interior, but if it loses the spirit that everyone is welcome, it will inevitably lose its soul. The encouraging thing is, as we've just seen, it only takes one steadfast person like Lily to reignite that flame and spread it throughout the entire team. This is undeniable proof that kindness, when placed in the right hands, has the power to transform an entire environment. If you believe that any place should be somewhere everyone feels respected and that they belong, leave a like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this with even more people. And don't forget to leave a comment with the words "keep warm" as a reminder that warmth, no matter how small, is enough to overcome the coldness of indifference.